We didn't win. We live to fight another day. And the fact is that we're going to have issues about funding the government come January 15th. We're going to have the debt ceiling we're going to have to deal with again. The looming problems that are affecting our country are still there. We're spending more than what we bring in, to the tune of $700 billion this year alone, even though we've got record income. And so the problems are looming. It's time for Washington to deal with the serious problems affecting our country.
Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of legislative weeks left in the year. Do you plan to bring up immigration legislation?
I still think immigration reform is an important subject that needs to be addressed, and I'm hopeful.
Mr. Speaker.
Speaker Boehner, as you know, your party took quite a beating after the shutdown in the polls, and you did personally. You just came from a meeting with your members. How concerned are they, and how concerned are you about potentially losing the House?
Listen, I think as long as we stay focused on the priorities of the American people, I think we're going to be fine. What are they concerned about? They're concerned about their jobs. They're concerned about their income. They're concerned about their own health insurance and how they're going to be able to afford it and how they're going to navigate through this bizarre plan that they now have to deal with. And so our job is to stay focused on the issues the American people are most concerned about, and if we do that, we'll be just fine. Thanks, everybody.
House Republican leaders this morning as the House here continues with votes on the Water Resources Bill. This is a vote on a procedural motion. A vote on the rule for debating the bill is expected after this. The Hill's Keith Lang reports today that the White House backs House Republicans' water bill. In a rare show of bipartisanship in the wake of a 2-week government shutdown, the White House said today it supports the House's version of a new bill to boost ports and waterways. President Obama will sign the House's Water Resources Reform and Development Act if it's approved by the chamber in a vote that's scheduled to take place today, the White House said. The Senate has already passed its own version of the water bill, and the House is widely expected to approve its measure. As you can see, there are still 80 votes yet to be tallied, so while we wait, we'll hear from House Democrats with remarks after their caucus meeting this morning.
Are we ready? Good morning. I'm Javier Becerra, the chairman of the Democratic Caucus. Pleased to be joined by our Vice Chairman Joe Crowley of New York. And today we're pleased to be joined by two of our colleagues, Congresswoman Dina Titus of Nevada and Congressman Mark Vesey of Texas. We're here to talk principally about health care and the fact that so many Americans will now have access to it. We had a good caucus meeting today where we discussed a number of issues, including, of course, moving forward with our economic challenges and making sure we don't go through the same manufactured crisis of watching our government shut down and the potential of America defaulting for the first time in its history in paying its past debts. And we think we can build now, after last week's agreement, on the types of measures that are necessary to get Americans back to work. We heard that some 150,000 Americans got jobs in the last month. That's good. Not good enough. We want to continue to see that improve because we have to make up from the Bush year recession where we saw some 8 to 9 million Americans lose their jobs. And so a lot of progress has been made, more than 3.5 million jobs created. 7.5 million jobs created in the last 3.5 years. That's good, but we still have a lot more to do because Americans want to know that there's going to be a good job waiting for them that helps them with securing the American dream for their families. On the Affordable Care Act, a lot of us want to see this move forward as quickly and as well as possible because for many of us, the issue is real about making sure Americans have access to quality, affordable health care. It's time for Americans, all Americans, to have the security they need in knowing that a health care bill will not push them into bankruptcy. And that's the beauty of the Affordable Care Act. The new health security law makes sure that Americans finally can rest assured that they will have access to a decent doctor and a good hospital should they need either of those for their kids, for their family. And so we're here to push as hard as we can to make sure that all Americans get to enroll in these new affordable plans that are being made available to them throughout the country. We're concerned about the process. We're not happy if the process doesn't work well. We're not interested in hearing about glitches. We're interested in moving forward. But for us, while the process should not be a problem, our biggest concern is with the product. We want the product to be there for many Americans. And you have before you, well, actually, in this case, 3 of the 4 of us happen to know what we mean when it comes to trying to get Americans affordable health care insurance. Because Mr. Vesey, Ms. Titus, and I happen to represent the 3 most uninsured districts in the nation when it comes to Americans having access to quality, affordable health care. And so while the glitches are upsetting, it would be a travesty if we on January 1st didn't see that Americans actually got to start using their health care insurance that was made available through the Affordable Care Act. And so we want the process to improve, but we're not interested in trying to torpedo the process. We want to improve the process as quickly as we can, because a whole lot of the folks who are going to need to have a good process and therefore gain a quality health insurance plan for their family live in our districts. And I know that Mr. Crowley's district also has a lot of Americans who are interested in accessing good quality, affordable health care. So we're here ready to work. We had some individuals from the administration, from the Health and Human Services Department come and tell us what the latest was. They told us of all the work that's being done as a result of the President's urging to try to deal with some of the errors that were occurring with the website, how they've improved that, how they're moving forward with more access to phone coverage to give people access to that information, and of course person-to-person communication as well with those who are interested in applying for the health care plans. We believe that come January 1st, a lot of our constituents are going to have access to a quality, affordable health plan, and we're going to do everything we can working with our colleagues and working with the administration to make sure that's exactly what happens. Because at the end of the day, no process should bog down people getting a good product to make sure that they have good quality coverage on health insurance for their families. With that, let me yield now to our Vice Chairman, Mr. Crowley.
On this vote, the yeas are 225 and the nays are 194. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
What purpose is the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
So votes now on the rule for debating this House Water Resources bill that would establish a new process for determining which Army Corps of Engineers water resource projects move forward. 100 amendments were offered to be debated. That was reduced to 24 that members will consider today. A vote on final passage expected at about 5:30 Eastern. So a 5-minute vote here. So more now from the House Democrats briefing with reporters earlier today.
And eligibility determination more than any other state, no offense to any of my colleagues here. So New York is doing quite well. So does something need to be done to fix the technical issues? Absolutely. But we can't lose sight of the fact that this law is giving millions of Americans options for quality, affordable health insurance for the first time in their lives. Republicans are looking for problems to exploit. We Democrats are looking for problems to fix and to find solutions for. We just saw the shutdown of the United States government. The government of the United States of America was shut down in an effort to undermine the Affordable Care Act. They used the threat of defaulting on our debt, again, to undermine the implementation of this law. Really, one has to start to question the motivation behind much of the angst that we're seeing out there with the Republican Party as well today. So with that, I will now turn this over to Dina Titus from Nevada's 1st District.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Dina Titus, and I represent the Las Vegas Valley. As you have heard, Nevada is always one of the top states for the percentage of people who are uninsured. Some 200,000 people in that area don't have insurance. But Nevada is also one of the states that has its own exchange, the Silver State Exchange. And what's been overlooked in some of this criticism of the system is that those states are working well. Our exchange is up and running. We've had about 1,500 applications completed. About 140,000 people have gone to the website, looked at it, gotten more information. So we are moving forward. I held a roundtable this past weekend with different organizations that are also helping us on the ground, and that's something else we shouldn't forget. Our congressional offices are acting like semi-navigators to bring people into the system. You have AARP going after that group between 50 and 65 to be sure they have information. You have campus organizations at UNLV and community college going after young people. Planned Parenthood is reaching out to women, and navigators in the Hispanic areas are going after Hispanic women. Las Vegas has an unusual population that's working but not insured, and a lot of those people are women. A lot of them are dancers. A lot of them are in salons. They do nails. They do hair. They'd like to have insurance. We're not waiting for them to come to the website. We're going out there after them, and it's making a difference. It's very important that they are insured, that they have coverage, that pre-existing conditions will no longer mean that they can't get insurance. And that's the word that we're spreading, and it's being very effective. So I would urge you, as we look at what's happened with the website and we are trying to fix it, don't fall prey to the ecological fallacy. Don't forget, you can see the forest, just don't get bogged down in the trees. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Mark Veazey.
Dina, thank you very much. Mark Veazey, representing the 33rd Congressional District in Fort Worth, Arlington, and Dallas. And I have the highest uninsured rate in the entire country. About 40% of the constituents that I represent, about 265,000, don't have insurance. When you combine the Dallas and Fort Worth Metroplex together, you're talking about over 1 million uninsured. And contrary to what you may be hearing from Republican leaders in the state, I can assure you that, that Texans, particularly in the district that I represent and in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, want the Affordable Care Act to work for them. They want to enroll. And they want insurance. I'm very happy to report that someone that I'm very well acquainted with, I read an article in the paper today, she was having trouble on the computer, but she went on the phone and she was able to enroll in 15 minutes. And so we want people to continue to try to enroll. It's very, very important that, that people get insured. As many of you know, Texas decided not to opt for Medicaid expansion. Many consider that to be a huge mistake by the governor and the Republican-controlled legislature. Because of that particular decision, we're still going to have a huge gap that is going to occur in the state of over 1 million people. And so even with the Affordable Care Act, Texas is going to have these problems, but it's very important that people continue to try to enroll. We feel like that that the bugs in the system will be worked out. We feel like that we're making headway, and I know that the people in my district are truly anxious for this to work. And I'm going to be doing everything that I can. I've already held and been a part of 2 different programs with the Congressional Black Caucus to inform people about this. I've been a part of town hall meetings in the district, and like Dina said, going out into the community to inform people about the Affordable Care Act is something that's going to be very important. And I know that I'm doing my part, and I'm going to continue to do so because I know that there have been problems, but I believe that they can be worked out, and believe that people will continue to enroll, particularly Texans.
So as we get ready to take questions, I just want to mention in California, we too have our own exchange, and in California it's called California Covered. And I wanted to mention that in California, we have seen over 95,000 people apply for health insurance coverage in the first 2 weeks. Obviously, we're beyond 2 weeks now, but in the first 2 weeks, we saw over 95,000 Californians apply for health insurance in the exchange. We had over 1.6 million unique visits to the website in California, and over 100,000 people called the service center as well during those first 2 weeks. And so people are interested. People are anxious, and we want it to work well for everyone. We would hope that some of the states where you have the federal exchange would actually stop hindering the progress in seeing that happen. In places like Texas, we know that there's outright hostility on the part of state authorities when it comes to people finding out information about the insurance coverage that they will get.
That's 147. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
To be in order. Would members please take their conversations from the floor, clear the aisle, clear the well. The House will come to order. Schuster, Pennsylvania. Services, gentleman from Pennsylvania, seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 3080.
Without objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 385 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 3080. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 3080, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide for improvements to the rivers and harbors of the United States, to provide for the conservation and development of water and related resources, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, and the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Rahal, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
If the gentleman will suspend. Committee will be in order. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent that the exchange of letters with the Committee on Budget and the Committee on Natural Resources and the Committee on Ways and Means be submitted to the record.
The gentleman's request will be covered by general leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud today that the House is considering one of my highest priorities as the Chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013, or WRRDA. WRRDA is the most policy and reform-focused legislation of its kind in the last 2 decades.
The committee come to order.
Thanks.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said, this is the most policy and reform-focused legislation of its kind in the last 2 decades. The new name reflects the landmark reforms. We've added an R, WRRDA, Resources and Reform Development Act, because of the number of reforms we have in here. It's also the most fiscally responsible WRRDA in history. And also no earmarks, but it does not cede our constitutional congressional authority to the executive branch. We made sure that we maintain that. And we've worked together in a bipartisan way on this bill since day one, developing this bill with input from members, stakeholders, through listening sessions, roundtables, and hearings. I want to thank my partners and original co-sponsors, Ranking Member Ray Hall, and Water Subcommittee Chairman Bob Gibbs, and also Water Subcommittee Ranking Member Tim Bishop for their work on this piece of legislation. I want to thank all the members of the committee and all the staff for all their hard work and desire to work together on this important infrastructure and reform legislation. I'm also proud that WRRDA has received more than 70 letters of support for stakeholders and ask unanimous consent that that be put into the record.
Covered by general leave.
In addition, it was passed out of committee on September 19th on a voice vote. This bill is about strengthening our infrastructure so we can remain competitive. It's about economic growth, it's about trade, it's about jobs. Not just the jobs that will be created when we're dredging ports and rebuilding locks and dams, but the jobs that will help our manufacturers when they manufacture their products and send them into the world markets, making sure they get there in a competitive way. Also, making sure that those products coming into our ports and harbors, getting onto the shelves of our local stores, allowing the consumers to buy these products at a lower cost, allowing them to keep more of their hard-earned dollars. Congress has not enacted a WRRDA since 2007, and we can't afford to delay. Without improvement, our water transportation system becomes obsolete every day and we become less competitive. If we cannot compete, we lose jobs to those who can. Our bill cuts red tape, reforms the bureaucracy, accelerates project delivery. It sets hard deadlines on the time and the cost of studies. It also consolidates or eliminates unnecessary studies and requires concurrent reviews. And our bill streamlines environmental reviews. We're going to repeat, it streamlines them, doesn't eliminate them, but streamlines them. Our bill is also fiscally responsible. This WRRDA bill deauthorizes $12 billion of old or inactive projects that were authorized prior to this current law and fully offsets new authorizations. In addition, it sunsets new authorizations to prevent future backlogs at the Corps of Engineers. This WRRDA has no earmarks, and our bill establishes a new, transparent process for future bills to review and prioritize water resources development activities with strong constitutional oversight and without handing over our constitutional authority to the executive branch. And I want to repeat that. I think it's very important that this body, that the Congress, holds on to its constitutional authority and not give it over to the federal, the executive branch, as we have done for decades. We have been recognized by leading outside watchdog groups for having a bill with no earmarks and for keeping congressional oversight without ceding that authority to the Corps. I'm extremely proud of the accomplishments, and we should all be. WRRDA breaks down barriers that hold back the development of our water resources infrastructure. It maximizes the ability of non-federal interests to contribute their own funds to move studies and projects forward. It also expands the ability of non-federal interests to contribute funds to expedite the evaluation and processing of permits. And it establishes a public-private partnership program in water infrastructure with the leadership of Rodney Davis. That's in this WRRDA legislation. This bill improves our ability to compete by authorizing needed investment in America's ports. As I mentioned, this is a jobs bill, not just construction jobs to improving our ports, but to helping our manufacturers and to helping Americans be able to keep more of their hard-earned dollars. Our bill supports our underserved and emerging ports to also help them become more competitive. It reforms and preserves the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and the Inland Waterways Trust Fund to better ensure those fees collected from users for these systems are utilized for their intended purposes. These are all important and necessary reforms, but at its heart, WRRDA ensures that we don't lose sight of the importance of strong infrastructure and keeping us competitive in the world. Our bill supports our water transportation network to make sure that it provides the foundation for job growth and fosters a more robust economy. I ask all members of the House, Republicans and Democrats, to join me in supporting this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I am pleased to rise today in support of H.R. 3080, the Water Resource Reform and Development Act of 2013. I commend Chairman Schuster, the subcommittee chairman, Mr. Gibbs, our ranking member, Mr. Bishop, for the superb bipartisan way in which this legislation and the whole process has been handled. This legislation does provide important direction to the Army Corps of Engineers to meet its mission objectives and reform their planning and construction processes while also investing in our water transportation infrastructure and creating jobs. It has been 6 long years since we have passed Corps of Engineer water resources legislation, and while Congress has had its back turned on our water infrastructure, Mother Nature has not been complacent. Since passage of the last WRRDA in 2007, the nation has been challenged with floods, hurricanes, droughts. Our aging locks, dams, and ports have too often been neglected. This bill before us today stops the finger-in-the-dike solutions to our water infrastructure challenges and instead invests in these corridors of commerce. It should be pointed out that H.R. 3080 is not your traditional type of WRRDA. It does not contain member-directed projects, the traditional earmarks, but at least the bill does take a step forward in reclaiming our constitutional authority. It is clear that in today's challenging fiscal times, we have to find innovative ways to get water projects funded and completed. The pending measure identifies the role of non-federal sponsors in supporting and moving projects ahead. It provides a process to address the $60 billion construction backlog, that is with a B, billion, and addresses initial reform to the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund program. At its core, though, as the chairman has stated, this is a jobs bill. The investments contained in 3080 mean jobs in our maritime economy, as larger container ships will be able to call at our deepened ports to offload their cargoes while filling their decks with American exports. It creates jobs moving commodities from farms, coal mines, and steel mills more efficiently down the inland waterways that crisscross our nation. These investments also help protect our flood-prone communities so that homes and businesses remain safe when the rivers unexpectedly rise. I'd like to thank again all members of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on both sides of the aisle, Chairman Schuster, Subcommittee Chairman Gibbs, and especially our ranking member on our side of the aisle, Representative Tim Bishop, who has worked very hard on this legislation and knows its intricacies very well. Their hard work, dedication has developed a collaborative and bipartisan bill of which we all can be proud. I hope it's a model for future pieces of legislation. It certainly should be a model for this entire Congress. I urge my colleagues to support the pending measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from West Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd like to yield to the chairman of the Subcommittee on Water Resources and someone who has great responsibility in crafting this legislation, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs.
How much time does the gentleman yield?
Sorry, 4 minutes.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, now is the time for the Congress to reengage in the development of the nation's water resources and play a bigger role in prioritizing the projects and activities carried out by the Army Corps of Engineers. Congress cannot abdicate its constitutional responsibility in determining what projects should go forward and should reinsert its constitutional authority. H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013, is one of the most policy and reform-focused pieces of legislation related to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. 3080 is a bipartisan bill that was developed by working across the aisle to achieve a common goal of investing in America's future. H.R. 3080 contains no earmarks, cuts federal red tape, streamlines the project delivery process, and strengthens our water transportation networks to promote competitiveness, prosperity, and economic growth. H.R. 3080 is a jobs bill. $1.4 trillion worth of goods associated with 30 million jobs in international trade are impacted. Thousands of jobs are created and supported by the construction and maintenance of our waterways of locks and dams. This bill is fiscally responsible by more than fully offsetting new project authorizations with deauthorizations of old, inactive projects. This bill establishes a path forward for enacting a WRRDA bill every 2 years without conceding any congressional authority to the executive branch. This committee held numerous listening sessions, public roundtables, and official hearings in developing the legislation. We have heard from the public, industry stakeholders, and from our colleagues in the Congress while developing this legislation and have incorporated their ideas into H.R. 3080. Just because a study is costly, complex, and long does not necessarily mean it's a better project. In fact, a large, costly project with so many add-ons that never gets funded is a benefit to no one. And what used to take the Army Corps 3 to 5 years to do a study has now become the norm for the Corps to take 10, 12, or even 15 years to produce a study. And it's no wonder it's taking so much time since the Corps has to review in detail many different alternatives. In one case, the Chief's report was sent to the Congress last year. The study for the project was authorized in 1999. The original purpose of the project was for navigation improvements, but when the Chief's report was delivered to the Congress last year, the total project cost was $650 million. But only $250 million was for the actual construction of the navigation improvements. The rest of the project cost, almost $400 million, are attributed to environmental enhancements, not just environmental mitigation. In another case, the Corps engineers delivered to Congress a Chief's report for which there is no federal cost-share partner. That study took 7 years to develop, but since there is no federal sponsor, why should Congress authorize the project? The funding spent on that study could have been spent more wisely in projects where there are non-federal sponsors and where there are non-federal sponsors and local support. Too often, we allow federal agencies, including the Army Corps engineers, to literally study these projects to death. H.R. 3080 accelerates the Corps engineer study delivery process by limiting studies to 3 years and $3 million. In addition, we accelerate the study delivery process by requiring concurrent reviews at the district, division, and headquarters level personnel. Ultimately, the federal taxpayer is on the hook for these studies and for the length of time it takes to carry them out. The Corps reviews far too many alternatives and then sends to Congress a project request that far exceeds in scope and cost which was initially intended. Too often, non-federal interests and their contributions are forced to sit in the sidelines while our international competitors race past us. H.R. 3080 empowers non-federal interests and ensures projects will be completed faster and cheaper with local support. Too often, resources from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund are diverted to other activities unrelated to keeping the U.S. ports competitive in the global marketplace. H.R. 3080 creates the incentive to spend the funds for their intended purpose in a manner that all ports agree upon. And one of the most important elements of this legislation is that it ensures the legislative branch engages in the Water Resources Development Act process at least once every Congress. I appreciate Mr. Schuler.
Gentleman is recognized.
I appreciate Mr. Schuler, Mr. Schuster, Rahal, and Bishops and their bipartisan support. By working together, we can accomplish solid goals to get this done. I urge reforms passed, and I want to thank my subcommittee staff, Jeff Bowman, John Anderson, John Paul, and my personal staff, Corey Marshall and Joe Price, for their efforts. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very proud and happy to yield 2 minutes to our superb, super superb ranking member, Mr. Bishop of New York.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013. This critical bipartisan legislation allows Congress to renew its commitment to our nation's water infrastructure for the first time since 2007. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Chairman Schuster and Chairman Gibbs for the open and inclusive process with which the committee drafted WRRDA. I'd also like to express my gratitude to the Chairman and to Ranking Member Rahal for their leadership in returning the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee to its long-standing traditions of bipartisanship and collaboration. H.R. 3080 is not a perfect bill. It's not the bill that either side of the aisle would have drafted on its own. However, it represents a bipartisan effort based on valuable input from members and stakeholders, constructive negotiation, and mutual respect. This ought to serve as a model for how this Congress conducts the American people's business. This bill is about many things, but most importantly, it's about job creation, not just good construction jobs that will come with the authorization of Chiefs reports contained in the bill, but also the jobs that rely on a robust network of large and small ports and inland waterways to move goods throughout the United States. H.R. 3080 also provides some relief from the challenges facing the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund by setting targets so that a greater amount of fund proceeds are used for their intended purposes, harbor maintenance. The bill also provides for the maintenance of our nation's small ports. However, we members must be vigilant that the changes proposed in this bill do not further erode the ability of the Corps to carry out construction projects such as those necessary to meet the post-Panamax vessels that will come once the Panama Canal expansion is complete. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased at the progress we have made together on improving water infrastructure in the United States. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 3080, and I yield any time I may have remaining back to the ranking member.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from West Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Can I inquire as to how much time remains in debate for both sides?
20 3/4 minutes remaining for you.
And the other side?
25 minutes.
Thanks, Chairman. It's now my pleasure to yield to the Vice Chairman of the full Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and also the Chair of the 21st Century Freight Transportation, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I first want to say that I rise in strong support of this bipartisan jobs and infrastructure legislation. And I'd like to commend Chairman Schuster and Chairman Gibbs and ranking members Ray Hall and Bishop for working together to bring this very important bill to the floor today. This is one of the most fiscally responsible infrastructure bills that this Congress has ever seen. And I think it's fair to say that in my 25 years of service in this body that I have one of the most fiscally conservative voting records possible, and so I'm proud to support this type of legislation. Every day, tons of goods are transported across our waterways. Without basic infrastructure in place, much of these goods would be transported on our already overly congested highways. According to the Inland Waterways Foundation, a 15-barge tow can transport the same amount of goods as 1,050 tractor-trailer trucks. Moving goods on the water is also the most fuel-efficient and environmentally sound method of transportation. In addition, this legislation streamlines project delivery, potentially saving the federal government and our taxpayers billions of dollars. While I would never support a project that is harmful to the environment, I do not think we should drag these projects out for years and years and spend mega millions of dollars on studies and drive up these costs to ridiculous levels. This legislation sets hard timelines and caps costs for studies that have to be completed for infrastructure projects. Because H.R. 3080 removes so much red tape and bureaucracy, it helps us complete these projects in a timely and cost-effective manner. This bill, as I said, is a fiscally responsible one. Not only does it not contain any earmarks, as has been mentioned, it deauthorizes $12 billion worth of inactive projects that are no longer needed or feasible, which offsets all of the new authorizations made in this legislation. This bill also authorizes the important flood control projects that we need to prevent natural disasters. We saw what can happen when Katrina hit New Orleans a few years ago. That disaster caused an estimated $150 billion in damage, according to USA Today. We need to make smart investments today so that we can not foolishly spending billions of dollars after a disaster strikes. I urge my colleagues to support this very conservative and reasonable legislation.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the ranking member on our freight panel on TNI.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is far from perfect, but it is a good step forward. I have concerns about the environmental streamlining sections. There are common sense things we could do to advance projects more efficiently, but limiting public input is not one of them. The best way to expedite projects is to ensure that there is agreement among stakeholders and to identify potential problems early, which is one of the main benefits of the NEPA process. The real obstacle is lack of adequate funding. I am pleased the bill increases the amount that can be spent out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and expands the eligibility for use of these funds. The bill also requires the Court to make specific project recommendations as part of the study funded in the Sandy Supplemental Appropriations Bill on reducing the risk of flood and storm damage along the North Atlantic coast. This is an important provision, but we should do much more. We're still not doing enough to prepare for climate change, rising sea levels, and extreme weather events. Whether or not you believe these events are linked to global warming, the fact is that extreme weather events are happening more often, and we would be fools not to respond to that fact. It has been 7 years since Congress last passed a WRRDA bill. We are long overdue in reauthorizing these critical infrastructure projects. This bill is a bipartisan compromise, and I will support it with the hope that we can improve it as it moves through the process. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from West Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure now to yield a minute to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, today I rise in support of H.R. 3080. This legislation is the only fiscally responsible and reform-focused water resource and development bill to ever be considered by this House. This bill, as the Chairman has pointed out, contains no earmarks, places us on a path of a more limited role for the federal government in water infrastructure development, and lays the groundwork for private sector and state-level oversight. H.R. 3080 promotes the public-private partnerships and expands the ability of the private sector to contribute necessary funds to expedite and move projects forward. It also places a strict time limit on the amount of time and money that the federal government is allowed to spend on feasibility studies. It took the federal government 10 years to complete a study on how to fix the Jacksonville Mile Point navigation problem to allow for greater cargo. That project is slated to create some 3,500 jobs. The Port Everglades channel dredging study took 17 years and cost upwards of $10 million to complete. Project study delays like these are unacceptable and have far-reaching negative economic impact. I thank the Chairman for yielding, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Senator Bernice Johnson.
Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 3080 and want to express my appreciation to the committee leadership, both the chair, ranking member of both the full committee and the subcommittees. As the senior Texan on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, I applaud the chairman, and ranking members of their leadership in advancing this legislation to this point. And while I ultimately support the passage of this bill, I'm concerned about the streamlining provisions of this bill. If properly funded, necessary projects can be completed with appropriate environmental considerations and public participation. I'm discouraged that the environmental protections are being weakened under this guise. Within this bill, I supported language to increase commercial navigation capabilities for the Texas ports and waterways. With the expansion of the Panama Canal, these improvements will allow for an increased role in global trade and interstate commerce. The increased economic benefits and movement of goods. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to put my entire statement in the record.
Without objection. Time's expired. Gentleman from West Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. It's now my pleasure to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from West Virginia, Ms. Capito.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our committee chair, Mr. Schuster, and the ranking member, Mr. Rahal, from my state of West Virginia. I rise in very strong support of the Water Resources Reform and Development Act, or WRRDA. West Virginia is in the Ohio River Basin, where coal makes up 59% of the shipped tonnage. Waterways and ports support 9,900 local jobs and directly contribute $1.6 billion to the West Virginia economy. Domestic power plants rely on our rivers to maintain a steady supply of coal, and our country's coal exports have nearly doubled in the last 4 years. Efficient and effective water transportation has never been more important to West Virginia's economy. Projects like the Marmet Lock and Dam in my district demonstrate the importance of these projects. I'm especially pleased that this WRRDA bill takes steps to preserve the Inland Waterways Trust Fund so that we can reduce the $8 billion package of construction projects on our rivers. This will create jobs and spur growth. WRRDA's passage today will be a significant victory for West Virginia jobs, for American jobs, and I urge my colleagues to join me in voting for this bill. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too rise in strong support of H.R. 2080. And I thank, as before, my speakers before have thanked both the chairman and the ranking members on both sides. Especially the chairman and ranking member supporting provisions requested that will help the state of California. Section 131 requiring Army Corps of Engineers to review and report on improving water supply options at core dams in arid regions such as California. Section 135 allows the Corps to use federal funds to prevent and manage aquatic invasive species on the Corps projects include quagga mussels, short crab, and foreign algae. Not only a major California problem, but a problem for many rivers and other dams. They are very costly, and they will allow the Corps to assist our local agencies in combating the invasive species. Section 125 requiring the Corps to reissue regulations regarding levee vegetation and incorporate regional characteristics and levee performance. Some of the water agencies are complaining that the Corps may be a little heavy-handed, not looking at good science when requiring removal of trees and bushes from our levees, and it would require the Corps to work with local agencies to solve the problem in a regionally appropriate and scientifically proven way. Section 106 and 109 provide more flexibility for local agencies to sponsor Corps projects. That means accept funding. Section 201 allows for expanded use of Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, and we are asking for an aye vote on this. Thank you.
Time to expire. The gentleman from West Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I thank the chairman. It's now my pleasure to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from South Carolina, Governor Stanford.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the chairman. I thank him and the other members of the committee for their work on this important bill, because it's certainly about cost. I mean, you can't do anything efficiently if you've got a 15-year permitting process. It's certainly about competition. We're in a competition for jobs, capital, and way of life, and our ability to get product in and out depends on a vital and healthy infrastructure system. I mean, ports like Charleston ultimately are not state ports, not regional ports, but ultimately national ports, given how important, for instance, post-Panamax depth will be. But I think ultimately there's a much bigger consideration, which is a constitutional question on the balance of power. And to me, what this bill fundamentally is about is reclaiming some authority that has been ceded to the executive branch that is fundamental to the overall balance of power that is so important to conservatives across this Congress or across this nation. And ultimately that consideration, I think, plays even far greater weight than the cost and infrastructure components that are important as well. With that, I'd yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski.
Gentleman from
valued
Illinois.
member of our Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman from West Virginia for yielding. I rise today in strong support and as a co-sponsor of WRRDA. This bill shows that the T&I Committee is working together, finding areas of agreement, building consensus, and yes, compromising in order to get things done for the American people. I thank Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member Rahal for demonstrating how Congress should operate in constructing a bill that rebuilds America and creates jobs. Earlier this year, Congressman Whitfield and I introduced H.R. 1149 to fix our inland waterways, and WRRDA incorporates a number of way forward provisions, including project delivery process reforms, project prioritization, development of a 20-year capital investment plan, and Olmsted project reforms. In addition, this bill contains important provisions to stop the movement of Asian carp to the Great Lakes, and I urge support of Representative McCollum's amendment that I'm co-sponsoring, which would strengthen these provisions. With that, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from West Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's now my pleasure to yield to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I also want to thank Chairman Schuster and Chairman Gibbs and Mr. Rahal and Mr. Bishop for bringing this important legislation to the floor, and also want to thank their staffs. This innovative legislation is vitally important to the economic well-being of our country, because we have to have a strong inland waterway system in order to be competitive in the global marketplace. Setting a priority for inland waterway projects, reforming the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project delivery methods, and freeing up money in the Inland Waterway Trust Fund for these projects is vitally important. That's what this legislation does. I also want to thank the committee for including some of the Wave 4 language used to improve the inland waterway system. That bill was introduced in the House and in the Senate. Some of the provisions are in here. I also want to thank the committee for including language supporting our nation's small ports and harbors, also for their commitment to repair the aging levees that shield many of our local communities from devastating floods, hurricanes, and other disasters. And also I want to thank the committee for making sure that our freedom to fish is protected. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is extremely important, and I urge support of the bill. There's much in it to like. There are a few things that I think we ought to tweak as we move along. The levee vegetation issue is addressed. It should be modified slightly. There will be an effort to do that later. The crediting issue is still out and about. It should be modified. It's extremely important to allow projects to move forward with local money, so I would urge some modification in that. Ports, absolutely critically important. There's great progress made in this and the Harbor Maintenance Fund being used for its intended purpose. I commend all involved in that. The Chief's report issue has been significantly improved. I want to thank the Chairman and others for bringing back to this Congress the power that the Constitution gives it. The Chief's report issue is there. I would recommend that we modify it slightly to give a little bit more leeway on when and where a Chief's report is. All in all, it's a great bill. Congratulations, and thanks to all who are involved in writing it. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from West Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's now my pleasure to yield to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fleischman, for 1.5 minutes.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of this water resources bill, and I commend the chairman of the full committee, the ranking member, and the entire Transportation Committee for this bill. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a bill that is a step in the right direction. I represent a city, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We've all heard of the Chattanooga Choo-Choo, but there's another place called the Chickamauga Lock in Chattanooga. This bill basically does something that I've been working on so hard since I've been in Congress. It's a step in the right direction to finally work towards funding the Chickamauga Lock. What it does basically is it reforms the Inland Waterways Trust Fund. This is a trust fund right now that is fundamentally broken. Why? Because what it does, it sends all of the money to one particular lock project and starves out all the other lock projects in the system, including Chickamauga. This bill is a great step in the right direction because it basically works to fund it. In addition to that, it's a good bill because it restores, unlike the Senate bill, the power to the Congress in determining the funding of these locks. And let me end by saying this. Our Waterways Transportation Fund is critically important to this nation, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans. I know in my home city of Chattanooga, this lock, which is stopped in construction, needs to have construction started again. These are American jobs. These are American exports. These are American goods. This is a bill that is a step in the right direction for a great America. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very happy to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Frankel, who has worked very hard on this legislation and does a superb job of representing her ports in southern Florida.
Thank you so much.
The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, of course, stand in support of this bill, and I want to thank the chairman and ranking members of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee for extraordinary leadership in bringing this bipartisan and very important bill to the floor. Transportation moves our economy, and our waterways play a vital role. This bill is about jobs for America, and as a Floridian, I'm pleased to support this legislation that promotes our ports and protects our most precious wetlands, the Everglades. Today's proposal will allow Florida's East Coast ports in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Jacksonville to advance in preparation for the widening of the Panama Canal. Accommodation of larger and heavier loaded post-Panamax freight ships is expected to create tens of thousands of jobs and add multi-billion-dollar impact to Florida's economy. And today's bill authorizes important projects that helps restore Florida's most important watershed, the Everglades, with a 4-to-1 return on every dollar spent. This restoration means improving water quality, expanding recreational opportunities, and boosting tourism. Thank you. This restoration means improving water quality for millions of people, protecting our natural habitat, increasing property values, and expanding recreational opportunities for Florida. As this bill progresses, I hope we can work together to extend the period of authorization as in years past. But with that said, Mr. Speaker, this is a very good bipartisan bill. It's good for Florida. It's good for our country. I urge its support, and I yield back my time. Thank you.
Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Chairman, may I inquire as to how much time our side has remaining?
You have 13 1/4 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd now like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013. Among many other vital water projects in Texas, this bill authorizes funding for the deepening of the Sabine-Neches, where 100 million tons of cargo transit annually. The Sabine-Neches waterway is a major economic contributor to both Texas and America, providing $106 billion in revenue for our nation's economy. America's aging infrastructure is a threat to a healthy national economy. 13 million jobs rely on water infrastructure, and it's up to Congress to ensure that America's ports, waterways, and water systems remain the very best in the world. I applaud Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member Rahal for their diligence, and also to my colleagues on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for their tremendous work. I strongly urge all my colleagues to vote yes on this bill. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Chairman, I'm very happy to yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, and thank her for her tremendous input on this legislation and help to us as we develop the bill.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the 2013 Water Resources Reform and Development Act. Our nation's infrastructure is critical to a thriving economy. In Florida alone, civil works projects improve navigation at our many ports, assist with flood control, restore the Everglades ecosystem, and help protect our pristine beaches, which are central to our $65 billion a year tourism industry. Yet Congress has unfortunately passed only one WRRDA bill in the last 13 years. So this legislation is certainly long overdue and much needed. I'm grateful for the committee's leadership for championing this effort. WRRDA 2000 launched the visionary Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, or CERP. This 30-year federal-state partnership is the largest environmental restoration project in our nation's history, and after much delay, projects are now underway. This bill authorizes 4 additional much-needed components. One of those is the Broward Water Preserve, located in my congressional district. This project will help capture, store, and distribute surface water runoff from the Everglades and assist with flood protection and groundwater recharge. I'm also pleased the manager's amendment will allow non-federal sponsors to pre-fund projects prior to authorization, and I appreciate Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member Rahal's flexibility that this amendment affords my community. This will assist Port Everglades, a major economic engine in South Florida. Port Everglades generates nearly $26 billion a year in economic activity, but needs to be deepened from 42 to 48 feet to allow it to be competitive in attracting deeper draft cargo ships in the post-Panama Canal expansion market. The Army Corps, after considerable urging by the Florida delegation, is close to completing a long-delayed dredge study to make this happen. Despite years of intense efforts, the final study is not yet ready for authorization by this bill. Again, I want to thank Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member Rahal for their commitment to returning to a more regular WRRDA process. We simply cannot wait another 6 or 7 years to authorize the next set of public infrastructure projects. We need to start the next WRRDA bill in a timely fashion. In Florida alone, there are 4 critical projects almost ready for authorization, including Port Everglades, 2 other Florida port projects, and the Central Everglades Planning Project. All 4 of these initiatives are critical to our state and should not have to wait many years to receive authorization simply because of either Congress's or the Army Corps' delay. I urge my colleagues to support this important bill that will focus on our ability to create jobs and make sure we can move our economy forward. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from West Virginia reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I rise in support of H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013. I'm proud to co-sponsor this bill. Kentucky's 4th District is home to 276 miles of the Ohio River and 3 locks and dams. As such, we are willing hosts to millions of tons of interstate commerce. Pursuant to our Constitution, there is a federal role in transportation and infrastructure. Transportation is one of the few things that Congress actually should spend money on. In fact, the constitutionality of this issue was settled 2 centuries ago during our nation's infancy in 1824 with the landmark Supreme Court decision ruling in Gibbons versus Ogden. And congressional precedent for maintaining national infrastructure was established with the Rivers and Harbors Act of that same year. For as long as our country has been in existence, transportation has been a priority, especially waterborne transportation. I urge my colleagues to join me in support of this important bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Reserve. Where'd Shaka go? Oh, there you are.